Last Christmas Eve, while I was fighting to save a man's life in the ER, my in-laws forced my 10-year-old daughter to stand in the corner of their dining room for nearly 4 hours. She was hungry. She was shaking. And hanging around her neck was a piece of cardboard with 2 words written across it in thick black marker. Family disgrace. My name is Raven Collins. I'm 34 years old, an ER nurse, and a single mother. That night, while I was trying to keep a patient alive at a Nova Fairfax hospital, my in-laws decided my daughter needed to be taught a lesson. Her crime: she told the truth at the dinner table. I didn't scream when I found out what they had done. I didn't argue. I didn't beg them to explain. Instead, I drove home, tucked my daughter into bed, and opened a box I hadn't touched in 3 years. The files my late husband left behind. Inside that box was something Margaret Collins never expected me to find. And within 48 hours, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Not with apologies, with panic. Before I tell you what happened next, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Now, let me take you back to December 24th, the night everything started. The lights on our small Christmas tree were still blinking when the hospital called. I had set the table for 2. That was a ritual I started after Ethan died. Small traditions to make the holidays feel deliberate instead of empty. Cheap paper crackers from the dollar store. Cranberry candles Sophie had chosen herself. A pan of lasagna cooling on the counter because Sophie once declared turkey was boring. And honestly, she had a point. The tree was about 5 feet tall, pre-lit, and leaning slightly to one side. Sophie had wrapped every branch in silver tinsel until the whole thing shimmered like a confused disco ball. I loved it. We were 15 minutes away from dinner when my phone rang. The caller ID read in Nova Fairfax, and my stomach dropped before I even answered. Raven, it's Laura. The voice said quickly. Michael collapsed at home. He lost consciousness. They're bringing him in. We're down to 2 nurses tonight. I need you. Michael Dawson was our charge nurse. Laura wouldn't call on Christmas Eve unless it was serious. I stood in the kitchen staring at the lasagna, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles hurt. In her room, Sophie was putting on the red velvet dress I had shortened by hand because the store version hung in too long. She had also painted a small gift box for her grandmother, green and gold, with a card written carefully in 5th grade cursive to Grandma Margaret. Merry Christmas, love, Sophie. There was no one else I could call. My parents lived in Oregon. Natalie was already on shift. The only place within 10 minutes of our house was Margaret Collins's annual Christmas dinner, 20 relatives, a honey-glazed ham, and the kind of warmth that always came with invisible conditions. I dialed Margaret's number. She answered on the first ring. Raven, how lovely, she said brightly. Of course, bring Sophie over. We'd be delighted to have her. Her tone was unusually cheerful. That should have been my first warning. I knelt in front of Sophie, straightened the collar of her dress, and handed her the gift box. Grandma Margaret will take care of you tonight, okay? I told her. Mom has to go help someone at the hospital. Sophie hugged me by the front door, her breath puffing into the cold night air. It was 28 degrees and dropping fast. Come back before midnight, Mom. I promise I didn't keep that promise. An ER on Christmas Eve is a specific kind of chaos. The air smells like antiseptic mixed with cinnamon because someone always brings holiday cookies that go stale on the nurse's station while we run from patient to patient. That night, we treated victims from a 3-car collision on Route 50. A toddler with a febrile seizure, 2 alcohol poisonings, and Michael's empty chair, reminding us we were understaffed. I worked on pure autopilot. Start the 4. Check the monitor. Update the chart. Next patient. My hands moved automatically, but my mind kept drifting 10 minutes south to Margaret's house, where my daughter sat at a table full of people who shared her last name, but had never once asked how she was doing in school. At 10:17 p.m., I finally caught a 90-second break behind a supply cart. I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Sophie. 1 text message sent at 9:43 p.m. Mom, please come get me. No emojis. Sophie always used emojis. I hit call immediately, but when the line connected, It wasn't my daughter's voice. Raven, it's Margaret. Her tone was calm and controlled, the same voice she used at church charity events.
Sophie's fine. She's just being dramatic.
She's playing with the cousins. Focus on your shift, honey. I heard nothing in the background. No laughter, no music, just the faint hum of a dishwasher. Can I talk to her? I asked. She's in another room. I'll have her call you later. The line went dead before I could say anything else. I stared at the phone for a second, unsettled. Then Laura shouted a code blue in Bay 4, and I ran. It wasn't until 12:40 a.m. when I was changing out of my scrubs in the locker room that I opened Sophie's message again and noticed the photo attached. I had missed it in the rush earlier. The image was dark and blurry, taken from a low angle, like she had hidden the phone in her lap and tapped the camera blindly. I could see the corner of a room, the edge of a dining chair, and on Sophie's chest, the bottom edge of something rectangular, cardboard with black writing across it. I zoomed in. My fingers turned cold. 2 words were barely visible in the grainy picture. Family disgrace. I was in my car less than 3 minutes later. The porch light at Margaret Collins's house was off. Every other home on Oak Hollow Lane glowed with Christmas lights, but number 78 sat in darkness, as if the party had already ended, and the night had quietly erased it. I knocked once, then harder. Margaret opened the door, wearing a silk robe, reading glasses pushed up on her head, looking as though she had already settled in for the night. It was 1:20 a.m., and apparently, she saw nothing unusual about my 10-year-old daughter still being there. Raven.
Goodness, she said calmly.
You could have waited until morning. I stepped past her without answering. The living room smelled faintly of cinnamon and dish soap. The long dining table had been cleared, chairs pushed neatly into place. Everything looked orderly, untouched, except for one thing. My daughter. Sophie sat on the love seat in the far corner, her red velvet dress wrinkled, her eyes swollen from crying. Her hands rested on a piece of cardboard lying in her lap, as if she had forgotten it was even there. The sign was roughly 12 by 18 in, cut from an old shipping box. Thick black marker spelled out the words in looping cursive I recognized instantly. The same handwriting Margaret used on every Christmas card she sent. Family disgrace. Sophie looked up at me but didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her eyes told the entire story, hours of it. I crossed the room, knelt in front of her, and carefully lifted the sign away from her chest. The yarn used to tie it around her neck had left a red mark across her skin.
I
folded the cardboard once, then again, and slipped it into my coat pocket. Then I looked at Margaret. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded and her chin slightly raised, clearly waiting for a scene, waiting for me to yell. I didn't. Instead, I lifted my daughter into my arms, carried her outside, and buckled her into the passenger seat of the car. I closed the door quietly, walked around to the driver's side, started the engine, and drove away from 78, Oak Hollow Lane without saying a single word to Margaret Collins. Not because I had nothing to say, because the things I had to say would be written on legal paper. For the first 4 minutes of the drive, Sophie stayed silent. I didn't push. I turned the heater up to 78 and angled the vents toward her. Her hands had been ice cold when I carried her outside. Somewhere between the gas station and Cedar Ridge Drive, she finally spoke. Her voice was quiet and flat. The way children talk after they've been taught their feelings don't matter. I said something at dinner. Mom, about Uncle Travis. What did you say? I heard him talking on the phone last week at Grandma's house. I was in the hallway. He said he needed money from my college account, the one Grandpa made for me. I didn't understand everything. She paused, pulling out a loose thread on her dress. Tonight, Aunt Alicia was talking about how Uncle Travis bought new parts for his truck. So I asked if he paid for them with my college money. She looked down. I wasn't trying to be bad. I just asked. My grip tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles cracked. What happened after that? Everyone got really quiet, she said. Uncle Travis said I was lying. Grandma Margaret said I needed to learn what happens to liars in the Collins family. Her voice trembled slightly now. She went to the garage and got the cardboard. She wrote on it and made me wear it. She told everyone not to give me any food until I apologized. I swallowed hard. Did anyone say anything? Anyone at all? Sophie shook her head. Aunt Alicia laughed. The cousins went into the other room. Nobody said anything, Mom. I pulled the car over on the side of Cedar Ridge Drive, just 3 blocks from our house. I unbuckled my seatbelt, leaned across the console, and wrapped my arms around my daughter. She was shaking. Not crying, just shaking as if her body had already run out of tears hours ago. Sophie, listen to me, I said softly. You're not a liar. You told the truth, and I am so proud of you. She looked up at me with wide, uncertain eyes. Mom, am I a bad person?
No, sweetheart.
You're the bravest person I know. She fell asleep against my shoulder before we reached the driveway. I carried her inside, made her a peanut butter sandwich, and sat beside her bed while she ate it in slow, half-awake bites. Then I read 2 chapters of The One and Only Ivan until her breathing finally evened out. When she was asleep, I quietly closed her door and walked into the kitchen. Then I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I looked up at the box sitting on the top shelf of the hallway closet, the one labeled Ethan. Documents. I had shoved it up there the week after the funeral and never opened it again. Every time I saw Ethan's handwriting, it felt like the air disappeared from my lungs. I pulled the box down, but first coffee. What I was about to do required a clear head. It was a plain white banker's box with Ethan's name written on the side in blue ink. Inside were the usual things. Insurance paperwork I had already handled, our marriage certificate, Sophie's birth certificate, and photos from our honeymoon in Shenandoah. At the very bottom sat a manila envelope sealed with packing tape. It felt heavier than I expected. I slid a kitchen knife under the tape and opened it. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a certified quitclaim deed dated April 14th, for months before Ethan's accident. It transferred complete ownership of the property at 214 Cedar Ridge Drive. Our house, the land, everything from Ethan Collins to Raven Collins, signed, notarized, officially stamped by the Fairfax County Circuit Court. The second document was a printed record from the county property database confirming the deed had been filed and recorded, legal, final. The third item was a handwritten note on yellow legal paper folded twice. Raven, this house belongs to you and Sophie. I made sure of it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I read the note 3 times. By the 3rd time, the words blurred because my hands were shaking. Not with grief, but with something more complicated. Fury, relief, and the painful realization that Ethan had tried to protect us long before I even knew we needed protecting. For 3 years, I had lived in that house, believing it still belonged to the Collins family, convinced that Margaret Collins could take it back with a single phone call. That belief had kept me quiet through every passive-aggressive remark, every icy silence at family dinners, every time Margaret reminded me that the property had been in the Collins family for 2 generations. And technically, it still was, just not in the way she thought. The house was in the Collins family.
It was in my name.
I opened my laptop and went to the Fairfax County Property Records portal, typing in our address, 214 Cedar Ridge Drive. The page loaded. Owner of record, Raven A. Collins. I closed the laptop slowly, picked up Ethan's note, and held it against my chest for a long moment. Then I set it back on the table, opened another browser tab, and searched Virginia property owner rights occupant removal 30-day notice. It was 3:47 a.m. on December 26th. My daughter was asleep in her bed, and for the first time in 3 years, I understood exactly where I stood, on my own land. At 8:02 a.m., my phone rang. I was on my 2nd cup of coffee, sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad covered in notes. Sophie was still asleep down the hall. Caller ID, Margaret Collins. I let it ring 4 times before answering, not because I wanted to speak with her, but because I wanted to hear what she would say. Raven. Her voice sounded warm and carefully concerned, the tone of someone who had rehearsed her first sentence.
I was worried about you.
You left so suddenly last night, without even saying goodbye. That's not like you. I didn't respond. She continued, anyway. Look, I know the situation with Sophie may have seemed harsh, but that child needs discipline. You tend to cuddle her. She made a serious accusation at dinner in front of the entire family. She had to learn that actions have consequences. I stayed silent. Margaret hated silence. Right on cue, she filled it. Travis already explained the account situation. He borrowed a small amount temporarily. He intends to pay it back. It's a family matter. Sophie had no business bringing it up publicly. She embarrassed him. A pause. And frankly, she embarrassed me. There it was. Not that Sophie was hurt. Not that I went too far. Just embarrassment. I hear you, Margaret, I said calmly. Good, she replied quickly. Then we can put this behind us. Her tone shifted then, dropping slightly lower the way it always did when she reached for leverage. And Raven, I shouldn't have to remind you of this, but you are living on Colin's property. It would be unfortunate if unnecessary drama complicated that. Arrangement. I looked at the quitclaim deed on the table in front of me. Ethan's signature, the county seal, the official recording stamp. I understand, Margaret. Thank you for calling. Then I hung up. Later, she would replay that conversation in her head and believe she had won. She would think the threat had worked, that I had returned to being the quiet daughter-in-law who knew her place. What she didn't know was that I had recorded every word. Virginia is a one-party consent state. I saved the audio file, timestamped it, and placed it in a new folder on my computer desktop. I named the folder Red. At 10:14 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from Travis. No greeting, no punctuation, just anger. Who does your kid think she is listening to private conversations and running her mouth at Christmas dinner? You better teach that girl her place. Screenshot.
Save.
40 seconds later, another message arrived. If you make a big deal out of this, I'll tell people about your breakdowns after Ethan died. Mom has everything documented.
Don't test me.
Screenshot.
Save.
Whether Margaret actually had documentation didn't matter. What mattered was what Travis had just confirmed in writing. He was afraid of what Sophie had said, and his instinct was to threaten. A third message appeared. Without the Collins family, you're just a night shift nurse with a lying kid. Remember that. Screenshot.
Save.
I was halfway through organizing the new folder when my phone rang again. Natalie Brooks. Her voice had that tight, controlled edge she used whenever she was furious on someone else's behalf. Raven, are you online right now? Have you checked Facebook? No, I said.
Why?
Look, I opened the app. Alicia Collins, Travis's wife, had posted 40 minutes earlier in the Fairfax County Community Fellowship group, about 300 members. The post read, "Sad to say our Christmas gathering was disrupted by a family member who tried to separate a loving grandmother from her only grandchild. Please keep Margaret in your prayers during this painful time. Family should come first." 47 likes, 12 shares. One comment read, "This is why family values are disappearing. Praying for Margaret." I screenshotted the post, the comments, the share count, the timestamp. Everything went into the red folder. Natalie asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," I said. "Online or offline?" "I'm calling a lawyer." Natalie showed up at noon carrying 2 coffees, a bag of cinnamon bagels, and a coloring book for Sophie. That was Natalie. She never arrived empty-handed, and she always thought about the kid first. Sophie sat on the living room floor in her pajamas, quietly drawing on her tablet. She had eaten breakfast. She hadn't mentioned the night before, and I hadn't pushed. That conversation deserved a professional in the room, not just a mother trying to hold herself together. Natalie and I sat at the kitchen table with the door slightly open so we could hear Sophie humming in the next room. I laid everything out in front of her. The cardboard sign, the photo Sophie had sent, Travis's text messages, Margaret's recorded call, Alicia's Facebook post, and finally the deed. Natalie picked up the quitclaim deed, read it carefully, then read it again before placing it back on the table. "Ethan did this 4 months before the accident," she said quietly. "He never told me." Natalie looked straight at me. "He knew his family, Raven, and he made sure you had somewhere to stand." I stared at the yellow note in Ethan's handwriting and felt something tighten behind my ribs. Not grief that had burned through years ago. This was something else, something sharp, something grateful. "You need Daniel Whitaker," Natalie said. "Real estate and trust law. My ex used him during the divorce. He's fast, thorough, and he doesn't deal in drama. She slid the deed back toward me. He deals in documents. I don't want a war, Natalie, I said quietly. I just want Sophie to be safe. Natalie reached across the table and placed her hand over mine.
This isn't a war, she said.
This is you protecting what already belongs to you. Ethan handed you the shield a long time ago. Now you just have to pick it up. At 12:34 p.m., I called Daniel Whitaker's office. His assistant told me he could meet with me the next afternoon, December 27th at 2 p.m. I accepted the appointment immediately. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, I sat alone in the dark living room. The Christmas tree lights blinked softly beside me while the red folder rested in my lap. 7 pieces of evidence so far, and counting. Each one carefully time-stamped. Each one backed up to the cloud, copied onto a USB drive, and printed in a sealed envelope that I asked Natalie to keep at her apartment. I didn't know yet what Daniel Whitaker might uncover once he started examining the Collins family finances. But I had a strong feeling the conversation Sophie overheard was only the first crack in something much larger. To understand why I stayed quiet for 3 years, you have to understand the Collins family. Ethan was the oldest son, the dependable one, the one who paid his mother's property taxes when she forgot. The one who drove 4 hours on Thanksgiving weekend to fix a leaking pipe in her basement. The one who co-signed Travis's car loan when Travis was 23 and had already defaulted on a credit card. Travis was 5 years younger and lived by an entirely different set of rules. If he lost a job, it was bad luck. If he needed money, it was temporary. If he showed up at Christmas dinner wearing a brand new leather jacket and no one knew where it came from, nobody asked questions. Because in the Collins family, asking questions was considered aggression. Ethan saw it clearly. He never said it outright, but the message was always there between the lines. One evening, about a year before he died, he told me something quietly. My dad set up a Virginia 529 account for Sophie. He said about $52,000. Mom is listed as custodian because I was deployed when the paperwork was filed, but the money belongs to Sophie. I need you to know that. I remember asking him why he sounded like he was warning me. He squeezed my hand and gave me a tired smile. Because my family loves the idea of money more than the people it's supposed to help. Ethan's father, George Collins, had died 2 years before Ethan. After that, Margaret Collins became the gravitational center of the family, and her gravity had preferences. Travis was the moon she kept closest. I was the comet she allowed to orbit at a distance, useful, tolerated, and expected to burn out quietly. When Ethan died, the first question Margaret asked me wasn't at the funeral. It was at the hospital. I was still wearing the same clothes I had slept in for 2 days when she leaned toward me and asked what was happening with the life insurance. Not how are you, not how is Sophie, just the insurance. I used that money to pay Ethan's medical bills and keep Sophie and me afloat. Margaret later suggested I share some of it with Travis because he was going through a rough time. I told her no. It was the only time I had ever refused her directly, and she never forgot it. After that, the temperature in the room changed, slowly at first, then all at once. Fewer invitations, shorter phone calls, comments at family. Gatherings whispered just loud enough for me to hear. Sophie is getting so quiet. I wonder where she gets that from. And always beneath every conversation, the same reminder. You're living on Collins land, Raven. Don't forget who made that possible. I never forgot. I just didn't realize yet that it wasn't true. Daniel Whitaker's office was on the 2nd floor of an old brick building in Old Town Alexandria, directly above a small bakery. The stairwell smelled strongly of sourdough bread. It was the kind of detail my brain focused on because everything else in me was operating on 4 hours of sleep and sheer professional discipline. Daniel was in his mid-40s. His desk was perfectly organized. No family photos, just framed diplomas and a Virginia state flag in the corner. He shook my hand, gestured toward the chair across from him, and said simply, "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. Let's begin with the property." I placed the red folder on his desk and opened it the same way I would open a patient chart in the ER deed. First, Daniel studied the quitclaim deed in silence for nearly 2 minutes. He examined the notary seal, the recording stamp, the names of the grantor and grantee. Then he opened the Fairfax County Property Records database on his computer, entered the address, and turned the screen toward me. "Miss Collins," he said calmly, "this deed is valid and properly recorded. You are the sole legal owner of 214 Cedar Ridge Drive, including the 0.8-acre parcel it sits on. There are no liens, no co-owners, and no encumbrances." I exhaled slowly. I hadn't even realized I had been holding my breath. "Now," Daniel continued, "tell me about the Virginia 529 account." I explained everything I knew. Ethan's father had opened it for Sophie. The account originally held $52,000. Margaret was listed as custodian. Ethan believed the money had never been touched, and Sophie had overheard Travis talking about withdrawing money from it. Daniel logged into the account portal, requested the transaction history from the financial institution managing the plan, and submitted the necessary verification information, Sophie's social security number and George Collins's name as the original contributor. "We should receive the full transaction records within 5 to 7 business days," he said. Then he paused, his pen hovering above his legal pad. "How much money do you expect is still in the account?" "I honestly don't know," I admitted. Sophie heard Travis say he needed it. I'm hoping she misunderstood. And if she didn't, then I want every dollar traced. Daniel nodded slowly and wrote something down. Then he looked back up at me. "There's one more thing." He turned his monitor again. "I ran a standard property check before our meeting. Your address, 214 Cedar Ridge Drive, is currently listed under a Virginia homestead tax exemption." I frowned. "I didn't file for that." Daniel nodded. "That's what I thought. A homestead exemption reduces property taxes for a primary residence when claimed by the owner." He tapped the screen. "But the exemption wasn't filed by you." My stomach tightened. "The filing," Daniel said calmly, "was submitted under the name Margaret Collins using your address." The room fell silent. For a moment, the smell of sourdough drifting up from the bakery downstairs suddenly seemed sharp, almost like something burning. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Daniel Whitaker said calmly, "your mother-in-law has been claiming a tax benefit on a property she does not legally own for roughly 3 years. He paused before finishing the sentence. "That qualifies as tax fraud, Miss Collins, at the county level." I sat there absorbing the words while my mind automatically began calculating. 3 years of reduced property taxes on a house she didn't own. 3 years of a financial benefit she had no right to claim. Most likely filed quietly within weeks of Ethan's death, when I had been too exhausted and grief-stricken to notice anything that wasn't about feeding Sophie and getting through my shifts. Margaret hadn't just controlled me with the threat that she could take the house away. She had been profiting from it for my house. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. Daniel opened the Fairfax County Tax Assessor's website. "The Virginia homestead exemption reduces property taxes by about $3,200 a year for a property like yours," he said, scanning the numbers. "Over 3 years, that's roughly $9,600 in unpaid taxes plus penalties, which are usually around 25%. He tapped his calculator once more. "So, the total liability is likely close to $12,000 that Margaret Collins now owes the county." He let that number settle in the air. "Ms. Collins," he continued, folding his hands, "I want to be clear about the options available to you." He began counting them off on his fingers the way surgeons count instruments before closing a patient. "First, you can issue a 30-day notice to vacate to anyone occupying your property without authorization. That includes Travis's workshop on your land. Second, you can file a report with the Fairfax County Tax Administration Office regarding the fraudulent homestead exemption. Third, depending on what the Virginia 529 records reveal, you may pursue civil action for the misappropriated education funds." He looked directly at me. "Each of these actions is independent. You can choose 1, 2, or all 3. I glanced down at the folder on his desk, the cardboard sign, the texts, the deed, the recorded call. "All 3, I said, "and everything goes out by certified mail." For the first time since the meeting began, Daniel paused with his pen in the air. He studied me the way I sometimes studied patients who walked calmly into the ER with injuries that should have had them screaming. "I've been practicing law for 20 years, he said slowly. family property disputes, trust conflicts, fraud cases, but 3 separate violations from the same household against the same person. That's unusual. I'm an ER nurse, Mr. Whitaker, I replied. I don't panic.
I tria.
A faint smile crossed his face. Then let's put everything in writing. He pulled out a clean legal pad, uncapped his pen, and we spent the next hour drafting 3 documents that would arrive at the Collins household before New Year's Eve. That evening, after leaving Daniel's office, after picking Sophie up from Natalie's apartment and making grilled cheese sandwiches with tomato soup, Sophie's comfort meal, I sat alone at the kitchen table around 11 p.m. and I started building my case. I'm a nurse. I know how to chart. Documentation isn't just record-keeping. It's the difference between evidence and a story. And I was done telling stories to people who only heard what they wanted. I opened the red folder and organized everything chronologically. First, the quitclaim deed properly recorded. Second, the Fairfax County property record printout confirming my ownership. Third, Ethan's handwritten note. Fourth, the Virginia 529 account inquiry confirmation Daniel had submitted. Fifth, Sophie's text message and blurry photograph from Christmas night. Timestamped 9:43 p.m. Sixth, the cardboard sign, Family Disgrace, written in Margaret's handwriting and sealed inside a gallon-size evidence bag. Seventh, the recorded phone call from Margaret on December 26th at 8:02 a.m. 8th. 3. Screenshots of Travis's threats sent between 10:14 and 10:16 a.m. 9th. Alicia's Facebook post, including the 12 shares and comment thread. 10th, the fraudulent homestead exemption filing listing Margaret's name at my address. 10 pieces of evidence, each labeled, each dated, each stored in 3 locations. A cloud backup, a USB drive in my bedside drawer, and a printed set sealed in an envelope at Natalie's apartment. Daniel had prepared 3 outgoing documents. A 30-day notice to vacate addressed to Travis Collins regarding the Cedar Ridge workshop on my property. A demand letter to Margaret Collins requesting repayment of the misused Virginia 529 funds. A formal complaint to the Fairfax County Department of Tax Administration regarding the fraudulent homestead exemption. All 3 were ready to be mailed certified. Return receipt requested. I clipped the tracking slips to the front of the folder and closed it. But there was one more thing I decided to do. Something Daniel hadn't suggested. When I mailed those letters, I wouldn't simply drop them into a mailbox. I would walk into the post office, hand them across the counter, and watch the clerk stamp them. I wanted to feel the moment they left my hands. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud. This was something quieter. This was consequence. Properly addressed and postmarked. The USPS Fairfax main post office was nearly empty on the morning of December 28th. One clerk stood behind the counter. A woman in her 50s wearing reading glasses on a beaded chain, softly humming what sounded like silver bells. I placed 3 envelopes on the counter. Each was white, legalized, with Daniel Whitaker's return address printed neatly in the upper left corner. The recipients' names were typed cleanly beneath the address window. Certified mail, I said. Return receipt requested on all 3. The clerk weighed each envelope, printed the green certified labels, and attached them carefully. Then she stamped each one with a firm, satisfying thud. Each stamp landed with a heavy thud, the kind of sound that reminds you the Postal Service has been delivering consequences since 1775. Envelope 1. A 30-day notice to vacate addressed to Travis Collins at the Cedar Ridge workshop on 214 Cedar Ridge Drive. Envelope 2. A demand letter requesting the return of $48,600 in misused Virginia 529 education funds addressed to Margaret Collins at 78 Oak Hollow Lane. Envelope 3. A formal complaint to the Fairfax County Department of Tax Administration regarding the fraudulent homestead exemption filed under Margaret Collins's name. The total postage came to $23.70. The clerk handed me 3 tracking receipts. I photographed each one, texted the numbers to Daniel Whitaker, and placed the originals inside the red folder, 3 envelopes. Together, they weighed less than 2 each. But when they arrived, and certified mail always arrives, they would carry the weight of every night I had sat silently at Margaret's dinner table. Every smirk Travis had thrown my way across the room, every whispered reminder. Remember whose land you're on. I stepped outside into the cold December air and walked back to my car. My breath drifted out in pale clouds. The sky above Fairfax County was flat gray, the kind that means colder weather is coming. Before starting the engine, I opened the USPS tracking app. Estimated delivery, December 30th to 31st. Right around New Year's Eve, there was something almost poetic about that. A year ending, a silence breaking, 3 envelopes moving through the system, steady, mechanical, unstoppable. Exactly the way consequences should move. The property dispute was one issue. The stolen money was another, but underneath both of those problems was something deeper, something no certified letter could solve. My daughter had been emotionally abused in a room full of adults who did nothing. I am a registered nurse in Virginia, which makes me a mandated reporter. If I have reasonable cause to believe a child has been abused or neglected, I am legally required to report it. There are no exceptions for family, and there are no exceptions for Christmas. That same afternoon, after leaving the post office, I sat in my parked car and called the Fairfax County Child Protective Services hotline. I gave them my name, my credentials, and a clear, factual account of what happened on December 25th. A 10-year-old child had been publicly humiliated, forced to wear a degrading sign, denied food for several hours, and isolated from other children as punishment for telling the truth. I submitted Sophie's time-stamped photograph from 9:43 p.m. I described the cardboard sign, which I had preserved. I provided Margaret Collins's name, Travis Collins's name, and the address where the incident occurred. The intake worker assigned a case number. A CPS investigator would contact me within 48 hours to schedule an interview with Sophie in a safe environment. That same afternoon, I also called Sophie's pediatrician and asked for a referral. He recommended Dr. Maya Patel, a licensed child psychologist specializing in family-related emotional trauma. The earliest appointment was January 3rd. I booked it immediately. Over the course of my career, I had reported hundreds of suspected abuse cases. I had made hotline calls from behind ER curtains at 2 in the morning, whispering so parents in the waiting room wouldn't hear. It never becomes easy. But this time was different. This time it wasn't someone else's child. It was mine. And my hand didn't shake once. That evening I did something radical. I put the red folder away. Not forever, just for the night. Because Sophie needed mac and cheese more than she needed a mother hunched over legal paperwork. For 3 days, I had been strategic. Sophie deserved a few hours where I was simply mom. We cooked together. She stirred the cheese sauce while I boiled the pasta, and she told me about a book she had been reading, The One and Only Ivan. It's about a gorilla in a mall, she explained excitedly. He changes his life with a drawing. She talked the way she always did when she loved something. Fast, animated, hands moving, eyes bright. Mom, Ivan never yells, she said. He just draws the truth, and eventually people finally see it. I nearly dropped the colander. We ate on the couch with the Christmas tree still glowing in the corner. Normally, I would have taken the decorations down by now, but something about those blinking lights felt important. Like the house needed to remember that Christmas had started peacefully, even if it ended badly. Sophie leaned against me, her plate balanced on her knees. Can we stay like this? She asked quietly. Like what? Just us in our house with the lights on. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Yes, Sophie, I said softly. We can stay exactly like this. She fell asleep against my arm around 8:30 p.m. I carried her to bed, tucked the quilt under her chin, and kissed her forehead. She smelled like cheese, shampoo, and 10 years of the best decision I had ever made. For a moment, I stood in the hallway outside her room, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. Then my phone buzzed. A USPS tracking update. Envelope 1 out for delivery. Estimated arrival December 30th, tomorrow. I turned off the hallway light and walked back into the kitchen, letting the quiet wrap around me like armor. The next morning, December 29th, Daniel Whitaker called at 9:15 a.m. His voice sounded calm, the same measured tone he always used, but by then I had learned the difference between his routine update voice and his you need to hear this carefully voice. This was the second one. Miss Collins, he said, I have two updates. First, the Fairfax County Tax Administration Office has received your complaint. They've opened a formal review. The standard timeline is about 10 business days for the initial assessment. He paused before continuing. If they confirm the homestead exemption was filed fraudulently, Margaret Collins will receive a notice for back taxes plus a 25% penalty. Payment will be due within 90 days of the notice. I wrote the dates carefully in the margin of my legal pad. 10 business days from December 28th placed the county's initial assessment around January 13th, Daniel continued. Second, the records request for the Virginia 529 custodial account has been submitted. The financial institution confirmed they received it. We should have the complete transaction history within 5 to 7 business days. He paused briefly. Once we have those records, we'll know exactly how much money was withdrawn, when the withdrawals occurred, and which accounts received the transfers. And if the numbers confirm what we suspect, he added, you'll have two possible paths. The first is the demand letter for voluntary repayment, which we already sent. If they fail to respond within 30 days, I will file a civil action in Fairfax County General District Court. Given the amount over $40,000, this goes beyond small claims. That means a hearing. If they fail to respond, we could obtain a default judgment. How long would that take? I asked. If they don't contest it, roughly 6 to 8 weeks from filing to judgment. I did the math in my head. Demand letter mailed December 28th. 30-day deadline January 27th. If no repayment, Daniel files at the end of January. Judgment sometime in mid-March.
Do it, I said.
And Daniel, if they contact your office before the 30 days are up trying to negotiate, I'm willing to listen. But I won't negotiate without documented proof they can repay the money and a signed repayment agreement. I'm not interested in handshake promises. Neither am I, he replied. Not anymore. After we hung up, I checked the USPS tracking app again. Envelope 2 in transit. I walked over to the kitchen calendar and circled January 27th in red marker. 30 days. The clock had started. On December 30th at 11:47 a.m., the tracker updated. Envelope 2 delivered signed by M. Collins. I stared at the screen for 4 seconds. Then I placed my phone face up on the kitchen table and waited. It took 43 minutes. The first call came at 12:30 p.m. I didn't answer. Margaret's voicemail sounded nothing like the controlled voice she used on the phone 2 days earlier. It was high and strained, like someone realizing the ground beneath them had shifted. Raven, what is this? She snapped. You sent me a demand letter through a lawyer over some misunderstanding about Sophie's account. Call me back right now. Voicemail 2 came at 12:38 p.m. Her tone was louder now, more brittle. I am your mother-in-law. I raised the man you married, and you're sending me legal documents the week after Christmas. Do you realize how this looks? The third voicemail arrived at 12:51 p.m. That one I saved twice, once on my phone and once in the cloud. Because Margaret Collins, the woman who spent 3 years telling my daughter she was a liar, said something very important. Travis used that money to pay off his debts. I approved it because he was in trouble, and that's what family does. I was going to replace it. It was a loan. Raven, you're turning this into something it isn't. I replayed the message again. I approved it. Not Travis acted alone. Not there's been a misunderstanding. I approved it. The same woman who forced my child to wear a cardboard sign reading family disgrace for telling the truth had just admitted on a recorded voicemail that she knew about the stolen money the entire time. I timestamped the recording and placed it in the red folder, and I did not call her back.
Some evidence you have to chase.
Other evidence panics and runs straight to your phone. New Year's Eve arrived with a kind of cold that makes latches stick. At 10:22 a.m., the USPS tracker updated again. Envelope 1 delivered, signed by T. Collins. Travis didn't call. He drove. At 11:40 a.m., I heard gravel crunch in the driveway, followed by a truck door slamming hard enough to rattle the Ring doorbell camera I had installed 6 months earlier after package theft. Sometimes small precautions turn out to be useful in ways you never expect. I was standing in the kitchen. Sophie was spending the morning at Natalie's apartment. I did not open the door. First came the knocking, then the pounding, then the shouting. Raven, open the door. You can't do this. This is Colin's property. That workshop's been there since Dad was alive. You have no right. The Ring camera captured everything. From 10 feet away, I watched Travis pacing across the porch. His face red, the certified letter crumpled in his hand. I picked up my phone and called Fairfax County Non-Emergency Dispatch. My name is Raven Collins. I live at 214 Cedar Ridge Drive. A man who has been served a 30-day notice to vacate is currently on my property banging on the door and yelling. I'd like an officer to come ask him to leave. The deputy arrived in 12 minutes. Through the front window, I watched Travis go from shouting to arguing to suddenly very quiet during a short conversation with the uniformed officer. The deputy examined the notice, checked my ID, verified the property records on his patrol computer, and calmly instructed Travis to leave the property. Travis pointed angrily toward the house, toward me, and said something I couldn't hear. The deputy wrote something in his notebook and repeated firmly that it was time for him to go. Travis finally left. I later requested a copy of the report. Incident report number 2024 to 123 1-0000087. Date December 31st. Classification verbal disturbance / trespass after notice. 2 hours later, Natalie texted me a screenshot. Travis had posted on Facebook. My sister-in-law just called the police on me for coming to my own family's property. She hired a lawyer and is trying to throw us off land that's been Colin's property for decades. All because her kid made up a story at Christmas. Please share, so people know the truth. 214 shares by midnight. I didn't respond.
I didn't comment.
I didn't post anything. I simply took screenshots, saved them in the red folder, and watched the New Year's fireworks through the living room window as the clock struck 12. New year, new rules. The first 3 days of January felt like walking through a town that had already decided what story it believed. Margaret's church friends shared Alicia's original post into 2 more community groups. Travis's Facebook rant spread through the Fairfax buy, sell, trade page. The story spreading around town was simple and convenient. A heartless daughter-in-law had forced a grieving grandmother and a beloved uncle off family land over a small misunderstanding at Christmas. There was no mention of a cardboard sign, no mention of a hungry child standing in a corner, and certainly no mention of $48,600 missing from a college fund. I first noticed the shift at the grocery store. At the deli counter, Mrs. Blake from the PDA suddenly avoided eye contact. Later that day at the hospital, a day shift nurse I barely knew approached me and said softly, "I heard things are difficult with your in-laws. I'm sorry." The sympathy in her voice made it clear she had only heard one version of the story. Messages from extended members of the Collins family started arriving in waves. Ethan's Aunt Margaret is devastated. She hasn't been eating. Is this really necessary? Ethan's cousin. Think about what Ethan would want. He wouldn't want the family torn apart. Unknown number. Shame on you for keeping a grandmother from her grandchild. I read every message. I answered none. Then on January 2nd, after finishing a 12-hour shift, I pulled into my driveway and saw Eleanor Hayes, my 70-something neighbor, standing beside her mailbox. She had lived on Cedar Ridge Drive longer than anyone else on the street. Quiet, observant, the kind of neighbor who noticed everything but rarely commented. When she looked at me, it wasn't with pity or judgment. It was recognition. "Raven," she said simply. Then she added something that stopped me cold. "I saw something on Christmas night at Margaret's house. I should have spoken up then, and I didn't. But if anyone ever asks me, I'll tell them exactly what I saw." Before I could respond, she turned and walked back inside. I sat in my car for nearly a full minute, engine off, staring at her closed door. Then I opened the red folder on my phone and added her name to the contact list. Not as a weapon, as a witness. There's a difference. The town had heard one story. Eleanor Hayes had seen another, and the system, slow, methodical, completely indifferent to Facebook shares, was still moving forward. On January 2nd at 3 p.m., the CPS investigator arrived at my house. Her name was Olivia Grant, mid-30s, calm presence, the kind of person who listened with her whole posture. She asked if she could speak with Sophie privately in the living room while I waited in the kitchen. I agreed. Dr. Maya Patel had already met with Sophie the day before and told me she seemed to be processing the experience well. Before the interview, I had given Sophie one simple instruction. A kind woman is going to ask you about Christmas night. Just tell the truth the way you always do. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. Through the wall, I could hear their voices. Sophie's quiet but steady. No crying. When Olivia finished, she joined me at the kitchen table and spoke in the neutral tone of someone documenting facts. Your daughter's account is detailed and consistent. She described the sign, the restriction of food, the length of time she was punished, and the family members present. She also explained what led to the punishment, specifically that she repeated something she overheard about a financial account. Olivia paused briefly. This information is sufficient to open a formal investigation for emotional abuse and neglect, including public humiliation, food deprivation, and psychological intimidation of a minor. Margaret Collins and Travis Collins will be listed as subjects. Then she added something I hadn't expected. We also received a second report this morning. My stomach tightened. A neighbor, Eleanor Hayes from Cedar Ridge Drive, contacted our office independently. Olivia continued. She reports that around 9 p.m. on Christmas night, she saw your daughter brought outside onto the front porch in freezing temperatures, wearing only a dress. She heard an adult female voice, identified as Margaret Collins, yelling at the child. Olivia folded her hands on the table. She also provided a cell phone video. The words hung in the air. The video is 23 seconds long. It was recorded from Mrs. Hayes's kitchen window across the yard. The child's face isn't clearly visible, which protects her privacy, but the recording captures the voice, the timestamp, 9:07 p.m. December 25th, and the weather conditions. I pressed both palms flat against the table. 23 seconds. 23 seconds of evidence I didn't know existed. 23 seconds recorded by someone I had never asked for help. Evidence confirming exactly what my daughter said. For a week, Margaret had been telling anyone who would listen that Sophie was lying, that I was unstable, that the entire situation was a misunderstanding. But 23 seconds doesn't misunderstand anything. Olivia explained the next steps. The investigation would include interviews with Margaret and Travis, review of the physical evidence, and a determination within 30 days. During that period, they would be advised that unsupervised contact with Sophie was not recommended. I walked Olivia to the front door. Before leaving, she shook my hand and said quietly, "Your daughter is articulate and very brave. You should know that." "She gets that from her father," I replied. And I meant it. When Olivia left, I returned to the kitchen and sat down because when she mentioned Eleanor Hayes' video, I found myself staring at the wall for a long time, letting the weight of that moment settle. I wasn't shocked that someone had seen what happened that night. What hurt was realizing someone had seen it and almost stayed silent. But Eleanor Hayes did speak up. Maybe later than she wished, but she did, and it mattered. If you're still listening, stay with me because the next part of the story is where the certified letters start doing their job. It's the moment when people who believed they were untouchable discover that they aren't. January 15th, a Tuesday, I was in the hospital break room between patients, finishing charts under fluorescent lights with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold when Daniel Whitaker called. The county assessor completed their review. He said the homestead exemption filed by Margaret Collins on your property has officially been determined to be fraudulent. She had no ownership interest in 214 Cedar Ridge Drive at any point during the filing period. I set my pen down. As of today, he continued, the county is issuing a notice for back taxes totaling approximately $9,600 plus a 25% civil penalty, about $2,400. Total due roughly $12,000. Payment deadline 90 days. I didn't speak immediately. Daniel waited patiently on the line.
She's going to say she didn't know.
I finally said she signed the exemption form. Daniel replied evenly. Every year for 3 years, the assessor's office has 3 separate signatures on record. 3 signatures. 3 years claiming a tax break on a house she didn't own. 3 years threatening me with that same house whenever she wanted leverage. Every time she told me, "Remember whose property you're living on?" she had been quietly collecting a discount from it. "The notice will be mailed to 78 Oak Hollow Lane," Daniel added. "I doubt she'll be in a festive mood when it arrives."
He was right.
Margaret called my phone 4 times that evening. I didn't answer any of them. The voicemails came one after another, and each one sounded different from the last. The first was indignant. "This is your fault, Raven." The second was bargaining. "We can fix this if you withdraw the complaint." The third was threatening. "We'll tell everyone what kind of person you really are." And the fourth voicemail was something I had never heard from Margaret Collins in all the years I had known her. Silence. 12 seconds of an open line, then a click. That silence said more than any of her words ever had. It was the sound of someone realizing that the system doesn't care about your reputation, your church group, or how many neighbors share your version of events online. The system cares about signatures, and Margaret were on file. January 20th. Back at Daniel Whitaker's office, the sourdough smell still drifted up the stairwell from the bakery below. But the mood in the room felt different this time. Daniel had a printed spreadsheet waiting on his desk, for pages long. Every line a transaction. "The Virginia 529 account records came back," he said, sliding the first page toward me. 23 withdrawals. They stretched across 18 months, beginning the previous June and ending in November. Total withdrawn $48,600. I studied the columns. Date, amount, receiving account. Every single withdrawal had been routed to the same destination, a personal checking account at Valley Federal Bank belonging to Travis P. Collins. The custodian authorization was signed by Margaret Collins. Daniel explained she authorized the withdrawals and transferred the funds to Travis. Under 529 regulations, that's only legal if the funds are used for qualified education expenses for the beneficiary. In this case, Sophie, none of the transfers showed any educational purpose. No tuition payments, no book purchases, no school invoices, just direct cash transfers into Travis's personal account. $48,600. My father-in-law, George Collins, had spent 30 years working overtime at a paper mill to save that money so his granddaughter could go to college. And it was gone, transferred piece by piece into whatever financial hole Travis had dug for himself, with Margaret holding the shovel. "What do we do?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "The demand letter gave them until January 27th to repay the funds," Daniel said. "As of today, we've received no payment, no communication, and no response from an attorney. On January 28th, I file a civil action in Fairfax County General District Court." He slid another document across the desk. The complaint had already been drafted. Charges include conversion and breach of fiduciary duty. Will request full restitution of the $48,600 plus attorney's fees, court costs, and the 10% federal penalty for improper 529 withdrawals, which Margaret as custodian is personally responsible for. Total judgment requested approximately $53,200. I signed the authorization. January 27th passed. No money arrived. No lawyer contacted Daniel's office. Nothing. On the morning of January 28th, Daniel filed the complaint. The court doesn't shout. It stamps. It files. It dates documents. And eventually, it sends someone to your door. January 31st, a Friday. The process server arrived at 214 Cedar Ridge Drive at 2:14 p.m. Travis was in the workshop behind the house. He had been dragging his feet about moving out. Still technically within the 30-day notice period, but clearly pushing every limit. The workshop door was open. I could hear country music blasting from inside while I stood in the kitchen. The process server was a small man wearing a gray jacket and carrying a manila envelope that was about to change Travis Collins's year. He walked across the gravel driveway, knocked against the workshop doorframe, and said Travis's full name. I watched everything from the kitchen window. I'm not proud of how closely I watched, but I'm not sorry either. Travis stepped outside, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He glanced at the envelope, then at the man holding it. His expression moved quickly. Confusion, irritation, and finally something deeper. Recognition. the look of someone who had known somewhere in the back of his mind that this moment might come, but convinced himself it wouldn't. "What is this?" Travis demanded. "Civil summons," the man replied calmly. "Fairfax County General District Court. You've been named as a co-defendant in a complaint for conversion in breach of fiduciary duty. You've been served." Travis refused to take the envelope. The process server simply placed it on the workbench, noted the refusal on his paperwork, and walked back to his car. Under Virginia law, service was still valid. Across the street, Ella Hayes stood by her mailbox. She saw the entire exchange.
She didn't wave.
She didn't turn away either. She just stood there holding her mail, witnessing the moment the way good neighbors eventually do. Travis called Margaret. I know this because 20 minutes later, Margaret's silver Buick rolled up to the edge of my driveway and stopped because the gate was closed. A week earlier, I had installed a simple metal gate across the driveway entrance. Nothing dramatic, just a latch and a padlock that made one thing very clear. Private property. Permission required. Margaret stood outside that gate for 4 minutes. I timed it. She gripped the metal rail with both hands. She looked at the house, my house, with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not indignation, fear. After a moment, Margaret Collins let go of the metal gate, climbed back into her car, and drove away without saying a single word. I closed the kitchen curtain, sat down at the table, and exhaled in a way that felt like the first real breath I had taken in 5 weeks. January 30th was the deadline, 30 days from the notice to vacate. Travis's lawyer, a discount attorney Margaret had apparently found through someone at church, advised him in writing to comply. I knew this because Daniel Whitaker received a copy of the letter. It read, "My client acknowledges the property owner's legal right to possession and will vacate the workshop premises by the stated date." The tone was stiff. The letterhead was generic. And between the lines, it clearly said, "We know we have no case." Travis arrived that morning at 8 a.m. with a rented U-Haul trailer and the heavy silence men fall into when they realize they've lost control of something they never actually controlled. He loaded everything piece by piece. Tools, scrap wood, a workbench, 2 portable heaters, and what looked like several months' worth of empty energy drink cans. He didn't knock on my door. He didn't look at the Ring doorbell camera, although it recorded every trip between the workshop and the trailer in perfect 180p resolution. Natalie came over around 10 a.m. She brought coffee and stood beside me on the porch. Not to gloat, just to be present. That was Natalie's philosophy about hard days. You don't have to face them alone. At 12:17 p.m., Travis slammed the trailer hatch shut. He walked to his truck, opened the door, then turned back toward the house one last time. "You're going to regret this, Raven," he said quietly. Not yelling, just tired. "You don't have a family anymore." Natalie took a sip of her coffee and tilted her head slightly. "You forgot the trash bags in the corner," she said calmly. "Want me to toss them, or should I send you an invoice for disposal?" Travis slammed the truck door and drove away. I walked into the empty workshop afterward. The air smelled like motor oil and sawdust. There was damage. A hole punched through the drywall and a cracked window pane. I photographed everything, dated the images, and emailed them to Daniel. If necessary, it would become part of a property damage claim. Then I locked the workshop door with a brand new padlock. Standing there in the cold with the keys in my hand, I looked across the 0.8 acres Ethan had quietly transferred to me before he ran out of time. Ours completely, finally, undeniably. In the weeks that followed, the consequences arrived exactly the way consequences usually do. Not suddenly, but steadily, one document at a time, and every new document made the Facebook narrative harder and harder to maintain. Margaret's fraudulent homestead exemption resulted in a county tax bill of approximately $12,000. She had 90 days to pay. She didn't have the money. I know that because Daniel later received a letter from Margaret's newly hired attorney requesting a good faith extension, citing unexpected financial hardship. The county assessor does not negotiate good faith. They negotiate payment plans with interest. By mid-February, Child Protective Services completed their investigation. Their findings substantiated emotional abuse and neglect committed by Margaret Collins against a minor child. Travis Collins was listed as a contributing party. The official recommendations stated no unsupervised contact with Sophie Collins until the completion of a court-approved family counseling program. Margaret never enrolled. Travis's civil case concluded in March. He never appeared in court. Daniel requested a default judgment, and the judge granted it. $48,600 in misappropriated education funds, $3,800 in attorney fees and court costs, plus the applicable federal tax penalties. Total judgment, approximately $53,200. The following week, Daniel initiated wage garnishment. Travis had recently started working in a warehouse. He would be paying that judgment back for years. Alicia, Travis's wife, discovered during the court proceedings exactly how much money had been taken from Sophie's college fund and where it had gone. She didn't post about it online. Instead, she moved back to her mother's house in February and filed for legal separation in March. I didn't take pleasure in that, but I understood it. The extended Collins family grew quiet. Not apologetic, just quiet. The kind of silence that falls over a family when a smear campaign collides with notarized documents, court records, and a county tax bill. Travis's Facebook post technically remained online, but facts have a way of making noise feel very small. The call came during the first week of February on a Saturday morning. Sophie sat at the kitchen table drawing while I washed dishes. When Margaret's name appeared on my phone, I dried my hands, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door. I answered the call one last time. Raven. Her voice sounded different, smaller. The polished church tone was gone. No rehearsed warmth, no carefully chosen words, just a 62-year-old woman who had lost her oldest son and was now watching the rest of her world unravel. I know I don't have the right to call you.
You don't, I said.
There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing through the phone. I made a mistake with Sophie, she said finally with a sign. I was angry and I went too far. I understand that now. I waited. Please, she whispered. She's all I have left of Ethan. Don't take her from me. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because I felt sorry for Margaret, although I could hear the grief beneath the cruelty, but because I needed to say the next words carefully. I didn't want emotion to blur them. Margaret, I said slowly, I'm not taking Sophie from you. I'm protecting her from what you did. Those are not the same thing. Silence filled the line. When you're ready to work with a licensed family therapist, a real professional, not Pastor Dave, and when you complete the counseling program that Child Protective Services recommended, you can contact Daniel Whitaker's office to discuss supervised visitation. Another pause. You do not call me again. You do not contact Sophie. You go through the process. Raven, that's my boundary, I said calmly. It isn't negotiable. Then I hung up. The call lasted 47 seconds. I know because I checked the call log afterward and added the record to the red folder. Old habits. I sat on the edge of my bed for a minute afterward. My hands were steady, but my jaw hurt from clenching it so tightly. The house was quiet except for Sophie humming in the kitchen. Some cartoon themes slightly off-key and completely perfect. And that's when I realized something. Family isn't a cardboard sign hanging around a child's neck. Family is the person who takes it off. In March, I opened a new Virginia 529 account. Same state plan, same purpose, different custodian.
Me.
I transferred the $3,400 that remained from the original account, the small piece left of George Collins's original savings, into the new plan. It wasn't much, only a fraction of what Sophie should have had, but it was clean and it was protected. No one had access to it except me and the financial institution. Meanwhile, Daniel finalized the wage garnishment order on Travis's paycheck. The math was simple and relentless. A percentage of every paycheck automatically deducted and routed toward the court judgment. Travis would be paying back what he stole for a very long time. The court didn't ask whether he was comfortable with that. Courts don't. Through the hospital's employee assistance program, I also met with a financial advisor. The consultation was free for staff, something I had never taken advantage of before because my life had always been too chaotic. She helped me set up an automatic contribution to Sophie's new college account. $150 a month. Small but steady. At an average 7% annual return compounded over the next 8 years, Sophie would still have a meaningful start by the time she turned 18. It won't be $48,000, I said. The advisor smiled.
It doesn't have to be, she replied.
It just has to belong to her. That same week, I returned to Ethan's box one more time, not for legal documents, for a letter I had noticed back on December 26th, but hadn't been ready to read. It was sealed with one line written across the front in Ethan's blocky handwriting for Sophie. Open on your 18th birthday. I broke my own rule. I opened it. Standing in the hallway, one hand braced against the wall because the floor suddenly felt unsteady. I read the letter. Ladybug, if you're reading this, you're 18 now, and I probably owe you explanations for a lot of things, but here's the one that matters. You deserve every good thing this world has to offer. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you don't deserve a seat at the table. Your mom and I made sure you would always have a place. Trust her. She's the strongest person I've ever known, even if she doesn't realize it yet. I love you past the moon, Dad. I folded the letter fully and placed it back inside the envelope. Then I returned it to the box beside the property deed. For the first time in 3 years, I cried. Not the drowning kind of crying, the kind that cleans something out of you. April arrived in Virginia the way it always does, slowly at first, then suddenly everywhere. One morning, the dogwood tree outside our kitchen window was bare branches. The next morning, it was covered in white blossoms. Sophie pressed her face against the glass and said, "It looks like it snowed flowers, Mom." On the first Saturday of the month, I finally took down the Christmas lights. Sophie helped, standing on a step stool while carefully unwinding each strand. "Can we leave one string up all year?" she asked. "Just the little lights by the front door." I smiled. "Yes," I said. "Some lights are worth keeping." Sophie was seeing Dr. Maya Patel every 2 weeks now. The therapist told me she was processing everything with remarkable resilience, which translated into normal language meant my daughter was stronger than anyone had ever given her credit for. She had started keeping a journal. No one told her to do it. She said writing things down helped her put them somewhere that isn't my chest. At school, she joined the 5th grade book club. Her first recommendation was the one and only Ivan. Her teacher emailed me later that week. Sophie presented the book to the class today with a confidence I haven't seen before. She told everyone it's about telling the truth even when it's hard. She's becoming a real voice in this classroom. As for the workshop, Travis's old workshop, I spent an entire weekend cleaning it out. Natalie came over to help. We patched the drywall, replaced the broken window, and swept away the last of the sawdust. When we finished, Sophie stood in the doorway, looking around the empty room. "Can this be my art studio?" she asked quietly. We painted the room together the following weekend. Soft blue walls because Sophie said blue was the color people used when they were thinking. I mounted a pegboard for her supplies and set a small desk beside the window where the afternoon light came in strongest. Natalie started coming over for dinner every Thursday. She always brought dessert. Sophie set the table, and the 3 of us sat in the kitchen talking about ordinary things, school, patience for my shift, whatever series Natalie happened to be watching that week. Sometimes I would pause and look around the table and think, this is what safety looks like. Not loud, not perfect, not something performed for other people, just 3 people in a house that carried their name with the doors locked and the lights on. One Saturday morning in May, the kitchen smelled like butter and maple syrup because Sophie had decided she was finally old enough to flip pancakes by herself. And she was mostly right. Only one landed upside down on the stove. We sat at the table by the window. Warm sunlight streamed through the glass in narrow golden lines across the wood. Outside, the dogwood tree was in full bloom. Sophie was barefoot, her hair still messy from sleep, drawing on a paper napkin between bites of pancake. I watched her concentrate, tongue slightly peeking out, brow furrowed, the exact expression Ethan used to make when he focused on something important. She drew a house, a simple rectangle with a triangle roof and a door with a round knob. In front of it were 2 stick figures, one tall, one small. Beside them, She added a tree covered in pink circles for blossoms. Across the bottom, she wrote 2 words in careful block letters. Our house. She slid the napkin across the table toward me. For you, she said. I picked it up and looked at the little drawing, the 2 figures, the tree, the words that somehow said more than any legal filing, any court judgment, any voicemail saved in the red folder. I love it, I told her. I know exactly where this belongs. That afternoon, I opened Ethan's box one more time. I placed Sophie's napkin drawing inside next to the deed, beside Ethan's letter, and next to the yellow legal note that had started everything. The box didn't feel heavy anymore. It wasn't something I avoided on the top shelf of the closet. Now it was proof, not of what we had lost, but of what we had survived. Margaret never contacted Daniel Whitaker's office. Maybe someday she will. Maybe she'll do the work CPS required. Maybe there will be a supervised visit someday in a therapist's office. And maybe Sophie will decide what kind of relationship she wants with her grandmother. That choice will belong to Sophie when she's ready. Not to me, not to Margaret, and certainly not to Travis. The red folder still sits on the living room bookshelf. I don't hide it. I don't display it either. It's simply there, like a fire extinguisher. You hope you never need it again, but you keep it somewhere you can reach it. I took another bite of pancake, while Sophie started a new drawing on a fresh napkin. This time it was a gorilla with kind eyes surrounded by other animals, every one of them free. The small string of lights by the front door blinked once and then held steady. We were home. And in that quiet moment, watching Sophie draw at the kitchen table, I realized something that took me years to understand. For a long time, I believed that keeping the peace meant staying silent. I thought patience, forgiveness, and endurance were what held a family together. But the truth is, peace that asks a child to endure humiliation isn't peace at all. It's just silence wearing a polite face. The real turning point in my life wasn't the legal papers, the court filings, or the certified letters. It was the moment I understood that protecting my child had to come before protecting anyone else's comfort. Love isn't proven by how much pain you tolerate. It's proven by how firmly you stand when someone crosses a line that should never have been crossed. Family, I've learned, isn't a last name or a shared table at the holidays. Family is defined by who makes a child feel safe when the world tries to make them feel small. And sometimes the strongest thing a parent can do is simply refuse to let that happen again. Thank you for staying until the end. And if this story stayed with you, if even one moment of it felt familiar, then take a second before you go. Tap like, so this story can reach someone else who might need to hear it today. Stories like this travel because people pass them forward, not because of algorithms. If you've ever had to set a boundary to protect yourself or your child, share your experience in the comments. I read them, and you'd be surprised how many people find strength just knowing they're not the only ones who've walked this road. And if you want to hear more stories about resilience, truth, and the quiet courage it takes to stand up for the people you love, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You can also share this video with someone. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next.